Hi, I'm Michael,
And I'm Christina.
and today we're talking about William Wordsworth's poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud.
Also known as daffodils, just in case.
Hmm.
Alright, so the main theme of the poem is how Wordsworth is connecting with nature, which it is specifically about him, which it's mentioned, I wandered lonely as a cloud, so you know it's more a solitary experience. And it's also in lyrical sense, which lyrical poems are about the author, like the poet, and their personal experience rather than a comment on something. Um, so throughout the poem, it's showing how he came across this nature, like a field of daffodils, which are so many that he doesn't even know how to explain it really. And at one point on line 11, he says he saw 10,000 at a glance, which that's a lot of daffodils, and I doubt there was that many, but obviously there's a lot of them. And they just make him happy and they make him feel this thing that he probably hadn't felt before. Because he's saying how they're dancing and tossing their heads and how they gave him wealth, but he hadn't realized what they gave him until afterwards when he's doing something that he usually does, which is lying on his couch in either a vacant or pensive mood, which means he's either feeling kind of empty or he's feeling unhappy or depressed. And when he thinks about this, it makes him happy again, as if he's with it all over again.
So let's talk about the first stanza. Anything you picked out?
Well, I particularly like how the first line of the poem is traditionally how the title is, I wandered lonely as a cloud. And wandered is kind of like coming across something, like not really like looking for anything in particular, you're just coming across it. And lonely as a cloud, which obviously is a simile, and I think personally that he's not actually lonely, and clouds in general you don't think are lonely, but on a day when it's nice outside and there's blue skies, the clouds are kind of separated, and so they're not particularly clumped together like usual. So I think he's just putting himself in nature, since this was such an important part to him.
Yes, nature. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a huge theme here, and I think he uses as much possible natural imagery as possible. It says on line 2 that floats on high or vales and hills. Some of these words I've even heard before, but they're all things that represent things you'd find in natural environment.
Mm-hmm. And since it says he floats on high over the valleys and hills, it means that he's higher up, which usually means he's happier. Because if he was lower down, you would think more of like a negative mood.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Well, obviously daffodils are yellow, not gold. But since he says a host, which is usually referenced with something more godly, like angels, like a host of angels,
Yeah.
then it makes more sense that he uses the word choice of gold rather than yellow for these flowers, and it makes him feel more special and almost like in a spiritual sense, in my opinion. He has like a spiritual connection with this nature.
Yeah, and I think he uses a lot of prepositional phrases. I noticed a ton of them in the first stanza, at least, to bring out about this natural imagery. Uh, Over vales and hills. Let's see, of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath trees, in the breeze. So he wants to not just tell you where he is, but what's in his environment. That's what prepositional phrases do.
And also having it beside the lake and beneath the trees, it shows how it's basically everywhere, the daffodils that is, and that they're fluttering and dancing in the breeze, which is it's personification, because flowers obviously don't dance, but it's in the breeze, so it's like a soft wind, it's nothing harsh or anything, it's calming, and they're dancing, so it's almost like a celebration in a way, you know?
Yeah.
And then it goes into the second stanza where it says, continuous as the stars that shine. So, and twinkle on the Milky Way. So not only is he going into nature, but the nature is expanding into the universe, so everything's connecting.
Right.
And then, obviously, it's daffodils are usually scattered and not in clumps. But since they seem never ending, they seem to be as vast as like the night sky, and they're almost like twinkling in a way.
So yeah, and like you were saying, a lot of hyperbole. Comparing daffodils to the stars obviously is not, can't really equate the two because there are billions of stars and probably only thousands of daffodils. But he wants to show you what he personally sees when he looks at nature, and that is this beautiful, massive world. So there are so many daffodils. It's so beautiful. It looks like the stars shining in the Milky Way.
And they're tossing their heads in a sprightly dance, which seems like almost like a fairy tale because you think of sprites as these little happy things and little fairy tales you hear as a child. And they're tossing their heads, which kind of thinks of like the top of the flower, kind of like bobbing in the breeze that was mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And it brings the daffodils to life in almost a supernatural way.
I just wanted to point out, let's see. On line 11, he uses, I think it's litote to draw it. It says 10,000 saw I at a glance. And I thought that was interesting. The rest of the poem generally flows with the normal word order, subject, verb, object. But he instead decides to say 10,000 saw I at a glance. And I thought perhaps he's trying to say that as if they saw him as much as he saw them. So he's part of it, not just an onlooker. And so I think I noticed middle of the third stanza there was a fulcrum. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
Okay. Well, after it says the joke on company, he says, I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. So he starts to think that, like, although he was happy, he didn't realize what had actually impacted him personally at the moment. And it's not until the last stanza that you realize what it did for him. It says, for oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. So it shows that when he's upset, which apparently it's an often thing, and he tends to be on his couch feeling either vacant or pensive, which you can't be both. You can't be empty and unhappy. But when he's feeling this way, all of a sudden in his subconscious, more like in a deeper part of him that he doesn't realize, this happiness returns. And it's like he's dancing with the daffodils again. He's remembering this event and reliving the happiness. Like when he says, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils.
Yeah, and I think he really wants to make the point. He uses a lot of these words, solitude, vacant, and then of course lonely. I feel like this creates the very negative, sad tone, and then it turns back into the more positive, happy tone. Mm-hmm. I thought that was
Mm-hmm. So after the fulcrum, it shifts to a more somber tone, and then it goes back to being pleasant when he remembers all the positive and like happy moments that he had with nature.
So unlike so many poems, it actually has a resolution. He's figured out. He's come to a satisfaction.
He's found his own happiness in himself. So not only did he have an exploration to nature, he had an exploration to his own happiness.
Yeah.
The end.